tonight, I want to introduce my guest, Sami Aaron. A lot of you know her. I recognize a lot of you from her organization, The Resilient Activist. But for those of you who don't know Sami, she is the founder of The Resilient Activist, which is an organization that seeks to build resilience, optimism, and hope in climate activists in response to the impact of the climate crisis. The Resilient Activist is fueling the movement from the inside out, providing community self-care and nature-connected programming that supports emotional well-being and vital ecological change. And I know Sami from when I used to live in Kansas City, in the yoga world there. That's where I first met her. And I know that Sami's organization's mission is built on her own personal experiences of loss and grief and healing. And she brings self-care and resilience tools to people who are working toward climate action and dealing with climate anxiety, which is really what we're talking about tonight as well. So thank you, Sami, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jill. It's so sweet that we've reconnected after a lot of years, kind of on parallel paths, there's health and well-being. And so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and it's, it is a testament for the upside of social media, because I've just been always like, you've been on my radar. I'm like, what is she doing? That was kind of cool. And yeah, so I'm really glad. One of the first thing I like to ask guests is sort of a general question, which is, what does health and well-being mean to you?
Yeah, a lot. So obviously, the first thing that comes up is a healthy body and trying to eat nutritious food, and haven't had any interest in much fast food for a lot of years. And a lot of that really started from an environmental perspective, but it flows over into a healthy body perspective, really trying to get enough rest and, kind of the typical things that you hear about, taking care of yourself and that kind of thing. But, also for me, well-being is finding the way to live mindfully from my values. And so, how do I reconcile not going to fast food when, Freddy's fries are really good, right? But I think about kind of in the background, my values are especially things like meat that's raised in other countries, the whole land clearing that happens in, South America and other countries to raise more cattle. So there's cheaper beef to be able to come back to the States for the fast food hamburgers. And so was this kind of journey of a lot of years of balancing that. How do I really live my values with what I eat and where that food comes from and how it was produced? And I've struggled for a lot of years to be what I would love to call myself a pure vegetarian. Haven't gotten there yet. Chicken is my comfort food. And a couple of years ago, I gave up trying to not eat chicken. And I made this decision, and I told my husband it was like this. It was really hard for me to make that decision and to say to him, I will eat chicken, but only if it was compassionately raised. So it has to be local, has to be compassionately raised. And it's difficult, it's difficult to find that sometimes. And, but it feels really good. So I would, I'd kind of say to me, that's what kind of feeling healthy and feeling resilient to me is really kind of that mindful practice of what really means a lot, or what feels good or what doesn't, and the other component is just really balancing my needs with what my mind thinks I need, like my to-do lists and my activism and my garden, like all these things that I'm supposed to be doing, or I told someone I'd be doing, or I promised myself I would be doing, and kind of finding the way to really notice when my body is telling me, I don't know, you need to kind of step back a little bit. So again, that's just another practice. So I would say that's the bottom line. It's a practice of living from what feels right, and trying to be mindful as much time as I can as to what really feels good and what feels like I really want to be doing.
Thank you. There's the theme of mindfulness. And when we spoke before, you talked about practice a lot. I mean, and that really comes down to it. It's not about perfection. It's about tuning in, right? To really hear that a lot in what you've said to me so far. So the conversation that we're having tonight actually started with a conversation that you and I had a couple of months ago now. I was working on an article about climate anxiety. And I thought maybe you could set the stage a bit for this group here. I know some people might have that be part of their regular lexicon. Some people are not quite sure what that means. How would you define climate anxiety? What it is, what it feels like, and who experiences it?
Sure. So I would say that I believe it's 64% of people in the United States believe that there is a climate change happening, right? There's still, I won't even subtract it, there's still a community of people that don't believe that climate change is happening. But for those people that are aware of it, there's more and more media attention, there's more and more articles written about what's happening with greenhouse gases, with increased temperatures, with severe weather events, pardon me, wildfires, severe flooding, all the impacts that are happening from increased temperatures and climate change. And so climate anxiety, the big term is just really who's reading about this and who's either experiencing some of the emotional impacts of those severe weather events or changes that are happening, and who's anticipating them, right? So there's some new language now in the mental health community. There's eco anxiety, fear about, just anxious about what's going to happen with ecology, with the environment. There's words like pre-traumatic stress. So it's similar to post-traumatic stress, but it's worrying about what's going to happen in the future. So climate anxiety impacts different people, different communities in different ways. So starting with young kids, even at the grade school level, a lot of children are really well aware of what's happening with the environment, and they especially feel really strong emotions about the potential of extinction. And so we look at the monarch butterfly, which I know, it's that I-35 corridor from Kansas City to Minnesota, right? It's like that's the monarch's flight path, and they are listed internationally as an endangered species. And so, so there's this emotional attachment for even very young children, understanding what's happening and worried about what's going to happen. And then you get to a little bit older children, high school or early 20s. There's a big movement about people wondering whether they should even bring children into the world. And in fact, within the Climate Psychology Alliance, there's a community of therapists who are actually working with particular modalities to help people make that decision. Young people who are childbearing age really want to have children, but they're trying to make that decision. And then you have climate activists, right? You have people that have been at this for, maybe just a few months or maybe for a few decades, who've really been trying to make a difference, and find that a good portion of their heart and their energy and their time and their finances and their funding is just at the whim of whoever's either in power, whoever's the elected official that day, maybe who owns a particular company or manages the finances of a company. And it can be a really, really difficult mindset for people who understand the science, are trying to make a difference, whether it's from a technological perspective or land use or reconnecting people to the natural world. It's huge. It's a humongous, unbelievably complex issue of climate change, and the people who get it embody that. And so their climate anxiety may come from an even deeper level than the general public, who who's getting it, who's worried about things, but they don't know all the science. They don't walk outside their houses every day and look at clear cutting in their neighborhoods, because that's basically what our developments are, right? Most of us, we were maybe in the prairie, maybe we were in a deciduous forest before our housing developments came through. So it's a different mindset, and the emotional impacts are really great. And they haven't up till now been identified as a community in need of mental health care. So that's kind of where the resilient activist is helping to really identify that community and see to it that there is support for the people who are struggling.
Yeah, and that was the real eye opener for me. When we had that conversation, I was thinking of it as the general public, which was the audience that I was writing for. And then when you explained to me, like, sometimes, like you said, general audience, the answer to feel more connected to nature or to deal with anxiety and stress is to go spend time in nature. But you were saying, if you know what you're looking at, that might not be relaxing for you, right? I mean, if you know that that's an invasive species, or that is, whatever it is, then you need something different.
Yeah, and it's really complex. And of course, everybody who's working in the environmental activism field has their own set of triggers, right? Like whatever they really know the most about, they can tend to see that and understand it and live it in every minute. And so it can get difficult to especially find places in nature where activists can really feel totally relaxed, comforted, supported. This sense of there's that eco psychology, that relationship between the health of the planet and the emotional health of the humans, and to be able to find that in a way that doesn't feel forced or compromised in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought maybe, if you don't mind, to tell us a little bit about how you got involved in supporting this particular group of people, and what are some of the tools that you have found over time are most helpful.
Sure. So it's a difficult story for those of you who aren't aware of it. My older son was an environmental activist, and he was working on a master's degree in urban and regional planning. He was in a joint law program, and um, the more that he understood about the complexity globally, all the social injustices that went along with environmental injustices, um, the complexity with governments, with social structures, with cultures, with capitalism, to really understand the whole picture, the less he felt like he was going to make any difference. And in 2003, we lost him to suicide. And he had been struggling for about a year prior to that, and he was in therapy. He was seeing a psychiatrist, taking meds. None of it was helpful because the people who were treating him didn't really understand the climate anxiety of a climate activist, right? It's not a mental health issue. It's not an illness. It's someone reacting to a very real situation in ways that they don't have the tools to understand. How do you live with yourself? How do you ever find joy in any minute? And so it took, through yoga, meditation, a lot of years, which I had never done before he passed, and spending a lot of time in nature, like really deep nature on my own. There just came a day, it was about 15 years after he was gone, when I thought to myself, I kind of have a lot of tools in my hip pocket that I think might have helped him and others like him. And so that's really the whole point of the organization. What could help these activists? And we have, one of our taglines is, the world needs educated, dedicated, visionary activists who have the resilience to see us through these difficult times. Because there were like 1,600 Environmental Protection Agency employees who quit after the previous president came into office. that does not bode well for our clean water and our clean air, right? That whole burnout thing is just, um, it's even worse for the environment, to know that there are a whole slew of environmentalists who have years and years of background experience, the science behind it, saying, I'm done, I'm just done, right? So that's really what we're here about, is to prevent those big walkouts and that burnout, and to help support their emotional well-being.
So you talked about a lot in terms of the tools that the resilient activist teaches and offers to people who are part of that. You talked about yoga and breath work. Can you say just a little bit about that? And then I want to talk about like what the rest of us might need to know.
Absolutely. So the first thing, and we've done some research studies, two through KU, and then one now through Kansas City University, which is the osteopathic medical school. We found that in one study, people who were in community of others, like-minded others, just being in community, people who had attended any one of our events, didn't matter what it was, statistically, there was a boost in their emotional well-being, like just this sense of, oh, I'm not alone, right? There's other people that get this. And so being in a community of others is really, really vital, right? That's a really important tool. Deep nature connection, like there is nothing like it. And even if you notice what doesn't feel that what do I want to say, nurturing for you outdoors, create it, right? You can bring in house plants, rocks. There's all kinds of ways to really be in nature, connect with nature, notice it through all of your senses, because that's what informs you, your body, your mind, your heart, that you're safe and secure. When you have clean air and you breathe it in and your body receives the breath, right? It feels good physiologically, and it feels good emotionally. And so through all of your senses, anything you can do, and I'm not talking take a 2-week vacation and travel across the country to get somewhere, right? I'm talking about in every single moment, what nature can you have? You can't see them, but I've got, house plants, you got a view out the window, and just like, that's just absolutely vital. And then, the mindfulness piece is, it's such a resilience tool to begin to practice and notice in every moment, how does it feel when I purchase this item? Like, where did this come from? And what was its raw materials, and what did it cost to manufacture it, and how much water did it take, and how much packaging did it come in? And I could go blah, 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 right, about every single thing, but it becomes a practice. Like, the more that you take one or two things a month, maybe, and really think about them, call Keurig and find out why they're compostable little things really don't compost at home, and have a chat with them, whatever. It just becomes this way of life. And every time you can say, yeah, that feels good, then it informs a whole lot of other things that are happening in your life.
And I think what's exciting to me, the conversations that we've had, is that, the more we step into mindfulness, asking questions, looking around, making decisions, the more activist we become, even if we don't consider ourselves activists, right? So I wonder, before we get to transition to the next part of our session, if you have any high level ideas of like where someone who doesn't feel like they've really started, like they kind of are now like waking up, like, I do want to do more than I'm doing. Where do you recommend starting? How do you recommend kind of the first foot out the door?
Yeah, I would say the first foot out the door is the first thing that caught your attention. So for me, it was down the Flint Hills of Kansas, and long story, but I was hiking by myself out in the middle of nowhere, and came over the top of a rise and looked around and couldn't see one thing that was man-made. And my heart went, like, it was that moment of awe for me, right? That peak moment in nature. And there was this sense of man-made that just stayed with me, right? So I invite you to do that. For you, it might be healthy food. It might be not seeing butterflies. It might be noticing that there's, you can drive 500 miles and not have one dead bug on your windshield. I will tell you, I'm old enough, or I remember where we used to have to stop every 2 hours and clean the windshields because we couldn't see out of them, right? So take whatever calls to you and just do a quick Google search. Any organizations working on this in my city, start right there and then see where that goes, or read articles or whatever. Yeah. Is that enough, Jill?
Absolutely. Oh, we go on all night, but I do want to transition. And for those of you who have come before, usually we just go straight into a conversation among everyone here. But if you are willing, because Sami has done so much work with mindfulness, I thought I'd invite her to lead us in just a very brief mindfulness exercise before we move into the conversation. And so I'll turn over to Sami in just a second, but I'd like to invite you to participate if you're comfortable, or if you'd be more comfortable to go off camera for this time, but please close your eyes and enjoy this, because this is a real opportunity to have someone who can really lead us. Thank you, Sami.
You're welcome. So as you're getting comfortable, I invite you to just look around a little bit and just notice any nature that you see. We're just going to do a little guided nature realization here. It might feel nice to notice the sensation of your feet against the floor, or however you're seated, whatever's beneath you, supporting your body. And again, it could feel good to just move a little bit, like a little twist, a little stretch, maybe shaking out, kind of letting go any tension, any gripping that you might be holding. And then take a nice full inhalation, and on your exhalation, just come into this space. It might feel nice to lower your gaze or even close down your eyes. And drop your attention into your heart for just a moment. Notice where the conversation so far has maybe touched an emotion or a thought, a memory that you have. And for just a moment, allow the breath to move in and out of that awareness, as if you could breathe directly into your heart. You could exhale and release from your heart, noticing how that feels. And I invite you to let your thoughts meander up into your brain, into your forehead, and begin to visualize some place in nature that just calls to you. It could be a place you make sure you head to on vacation or over the weekend. And just imagine your breath as you inhale could bring the memory of that place right into your mind's eye. Each inhalation, you begin to picture the scenery there. You notice the sensation of the ground beneath you, what is there on the ground. You tap into your sense of sight within this visualization. You notice the texture and quality and temperature of the air. In this place, as you inhale, how would the breath feel? Breathing in the breeze in this place, drawing it through your nostrils, all the way down into your lungs. And how does this feel? You imagine that your ears could just open just a little bit wider, a little more receptivity through your sense of hearing and sound. What might you notice coming in through this place in nature? The sound of wildlife, the sound of water, the rustling of leaves. And you notice with each inhalation, as if you could draw a little more sound in, sounds that might be nearby, sounds that might be out towards the horizon in your visualization. I invite you to, as you visualize this place, ask yourself, how did it feel to step into this place in nature? What was it specifically that just caught your attention, that called to you, that you wanted to reconnect with? And for just a moment, imagine how you might bring that awareness, that memory home with you. Is there something that you could bring into your home, your office, your patio that would remind you of this place, something physical and tactile that you could touch on a regular basis? And then taking one more full inhalation and exhalation, drawing your attention back to your heart center for just a moment, reconnecting with that little bit of emotion or thought or idea that we started this guided practice with, noticing how it feels in your heart. And then when you're ready, you can gently begin to open up your eyes and come back into our meeting.
Thank you, Sammy.
You're welcome. 5 minutes, good stuff.
Good stuff. 5 minutes.